Wagwan. Good morning, good night, welcome back. And if you're listening for the first time, I'm your host Melanie Byfield, welcoming you to another episode of The Real Situation, where we give you a taste of Jamaican politics. It's been a busy couple of weeks. Some new developments. Dr. Nadine Spence, you remember her from the Constitutional Reform Committee, right? She was appointed chairperson of the CLA, the Cannabis Licensing Authority. What does that now mean for her involvement with the CRC? You'd think that that's over, right? Now that she's been appointed to a government agency. And we really wouldn't represent civil society in that regard, one would think. Opposition spokesman on education, Damien Crawford, made an outstanding presentation in Parliament, but it was extremely worrying. He put forward some data that gives a very damning account of the state of education in Jamaica, but he didn't stop with a presentation to Parliament. Bridgen filed a lawsuit against the government. What is he asking for? A Supreme Court declaration that the right of every Jamaican child to publicly funded tuition at the pre-primary and primary levels has been breached and is likely to be breached. And for a declaration that the infringement of this constitutional right is not reasonably justified. These rights are found in the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms Constitutional Amendment Act of 2011. Under Section 3K, subsection 2, it says that a citizen of Jamaica basically is entitled to a publicly funded tuition in a public educational institution at the pre-primary and primary level. So that's the same session of Parliament that had the whole mace incident, right? What the hell is a mace anyway? You might be asking. But, and what is it doing in the Jamaican House of Parliament? So let's learn a little about the mace. The mace was introduced early in the 14th century into English Parliament to signify the permission granted by the Crown to allow Parliament to assemble. Remembering there's three elements to Parliament, right? The Crown, the Houses of Parliament and the Senate. It's present at every session and Parliament isn't properly constituted without its presence in the room. So, yeah, Angela Brown Burke wasn't the first, and I'm quite sure she won't be the last to touch the mace. We know Edmund Bartland did it. An ex-MP in the UK Parliament did it. The backside, if it gets flinged through the window, like in the Bahamas. You see that one, right? Okay. One thing I'll say about these parliamentary sessions, they're very informative. But is everyone remembering that Jamaican children are watching, along with the rest of the world? When people are going to stand up and tell an ex-MP to shut your mouth loud and clear. And then there's this article that was saying, consider a non-MP House Speaker. I mean, is that the answer? I mean, we could even look at it from a football perspective, right? I mean, since the World Cup is coming up next month. How would you feel if the referee says, well, I know it's a Brazil versus Argentina game and I'm Brazilian, so, I'll do my best to call it fair, but I was selected to officiate by the Brazilian team, so, yeah. Which ball are you I got left the field if the ref say, hey, boy, leave the studio? Because he could have said like the ref in the Bournemouth game yesterday, right? After review, the yellow card for performer number 10 has been upgraded to red. Show the card. Enough said. Job done. I mean, I'm just saying. So, okay, what's this got to do with constitutional reform? So the Handbook for Parliamentarians 2012 has the mace, a section on the mace, little section. It says the mace is the symbol of royal authority, and the Parliament is not properly constituted without the presence of the mace on the table. There are two maces, one for the Senate and the other for the House of Representatives. At the start of each day's sitting, the presiding officer is preceded by the marshal bearing the mace, and the mace is placed on the table of the House. When the House resolves into a committee of the whole and the presiding officer functions as chairman, the mace is placed under the table. So check out the real situation. If Jamaica was a republic, would there even be a mace in the Parliament? I mean, it's not mentioned in the Constitution, and if it was retained for the sake of tradition, what would it look like? Now, let me tell you about South Africa's mace. I'm going to read you a little something about their mace, which is, I just thought this was really interesting and quite fitting. So it says that it signifies that the House is formally in session and its proceedings are official. A new mace was used for the first time in September 2004. At the head of the mace is an 18-carat gold drum covered in springbok skin, which in turn is attached to the drum by 18 buttons made from South African minerals and gemstones. On top of the drum rests a book made from gold, on which in raised text is an extract from the preamble to the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. The drum is illustrated with images of South Africans going about their daily business as a miner, saxophonist, machinist, architect, builder, soccer player, football that, forklift driver, scientist, teacher, doctor, domestic worker, a woman with a baby on her back and a hoe in her hand, a woman driving a tractor, and children reading and working. The top of the shaft is encircled by an 18-carat gold band with 6 black and 6 white half-carat diamonds set into it. Beneath this is the South African coat of arms in full colour enamel. 2/3 from the top of the mace is a beaded South African flag. The new mace was designed to reflect the history, tradition, diversity, culture and languages in South Africa. The mace also celebrates the country's natural beauty, its plant and animal life and its rich mineral resources. Each element was carefully chosen with this in mind. The mace is the shape of the mace recalls the knob curry, an African symbol of defense, authority and leadership. The drum, which forms the head of the mace, is an expression of the African tradition of using drums to call people together for a meeting. The open book on the top of the drum symbolises the Constitution of South Africa and the principles around which Parliament functions. It's the supreme law of the country. This is echoed in the position at the top of the mace. The writing on the open pages of the book is the first line of the preamble to the Constitution in each of the 11 official languages, and one line from an extinct Khoisan language. The use of the different materials and symbols on the mace were also chosen to represent the idea that the most advanced technology in the world can live harmoniously beside ancient traditional techniques. The result is a mace that recalls the past, mirrors the present, and looks forward to the future. I ate that. So, back to Parliament. So Angela Brown-Burke didn't return after they took a 5-minute recess. participating no further, and so the opposition was down one vote. Yep, all of this took place when the most consequential piece of Jamaican legislation, as it's been referred to many times, was being amended and voted on. Front and centre in this debate were some of the most fundamental issues that are also front and centre in constitutional reform: good governance, corruption, accountability, and the centralisation of power. Yep. The news became about the mace instead of Damien Crawford's presentation on the state of education in Jamaica and all the other presentations that drew attention to the issues of the bill that involves trillions of dollars of taxpayers' money, and that, by the way, passed the House and the Senate. So while we have to acknowledge wrong is wrong, all voices must be heard. Isn't that true? I mean, the Speaker is a constitutional position, and so is the opposition leader. One thing I must say, though, Dr. Brown-Burke, she gave a ratted presentation in a parliament. Whee! Bad. Okay, speaking of Nara and things looking a little misty, here comes the sun. And in the Gleaner, the article was unconstitutional. Court strikes down Bengal mining permit in Dry Harbour Mountains. We'll talk a little bit about that article. And I'm going to read a little bit from what was in the Gleaner. The government did say, though, they're going to appeal what is a landmark constitutional court ruling that struck down a ministerial decision to override an environmental regulator's rejection of bauxite and limestone mining in an ecologically sensitive area of St. Anne. Now, I will say that in order to, it'll be interesting to know what the grounds of appeal are. They have 42 days from the date of the order to appeal, which can only really be on an error of law. That is, if the judge applied the wrong legal principle, misinterpreted a statute, or misunderstood the legal burden or standard of proof, or on an error of fact, where the decision was one that no reasonable judge could have reached based on the evidence presented. So, the court's ruling was delivered by Justices Sonia Wint-Blair, Andrea Thomas, and Tricia Hutchinson Shelley. Yes, the ruling declared unconstitutional an environmental permit granted to Bengal Development Limited to mine bauxite, peat, sand, and other minerals in the ecologically sensitive Dry Harbour Mountains, which is located between Rio Bueno and Discovery Bay in St. Anne. Both the permit and the ministerial decision authorising it were ruled unconstitutional, void, and of no effect. The court declared that the permit was likely to breach residents' rights to a healthy environment and the protection of their ecological heritage. Dry Harbour is known for its unique karst topography. Karst topography forms when water dissolves soft rock like limestone and creates a distinctive landscape. So it's known for its unique karst topography, significant underground water systems, and high levels of endemic flora and fauna. What does that mean? Flora consists of plants and vegetation. Flora consists of plants and the vegetation side of nature, including plants grown from roots that rely on the sun. Fauna is the wildlife side and includes birds, mammals, fish, and insects. So flora and fauna, more commonly known as plants and wildlife, are the circle of life for all of us. At the centre of the ruling was the October 2020 decision by Prime Minister Andrew Holness acting as minister responsible for the Natural Resources Conservation Authority, the NRCA, to overturn their rejection of Bengal's application. Justice Wint Blair, who wrote the main opinion, argued that this court is not saying that the minister was bound to agree with the NRCA, but once he chose to disagree with the authority's considered conclusion, there had to be a clear evidence-based, reasoned justification for doing so. The judge noted that there was no document outlining the reasons for overturning the NRCA's decision, and that the 76 conditions accompanying the permit do not transform likely irreversible environmental harm into constitutionally acceptable minimal impairment merely by being attached to the permit. King's Counsel Michael Hilton, who led the legal challenge on behalf of 8 residents, said the ruling carries implications that stretch well beyond the Bengal case. It speaks to the limits of executive power. Where does the policy-making and other decision-making power of a minister or government body stop? And what are the limitations, Hilton said. He said the judgment sets clearer standards ministers must meet when overturning a regulator's decision. You're entitled to come to another view, but you need a good decision and a demonstrably better decision than the body you're overruling, he said. And you need to explain the reason to the public, to the affected people, and if necessary to the court. That's a really big point. The residents relied largely on evidence from the government and Bengal. They include the NRC's stance against the permit application, objections from the Forestry Department, which warned that Bengal's environmental impact assessment lacked feasible mitigation measures, and that no quarry site in Jamaica had been successfully restored through reforestation. Bengal's own assessment also acknowledged risks, including blasting hazards and groundwater contamination. Last Thursday's unanimous verdict of the Constitutional Court landed in the middle of a national debate over the controversial NARA bill, which is the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, that's NARA, right? A special purpose legislation designed to fast-track reconstruction projects following Hurricane Melissa's devastation. Critics, including dozens of civil society groups and individuals, and the parliamentary opposition, have raised concerns about concentrating power in a minister, including giving powers to override regulatory bodies. So, yeah, basically what this case did was say that, so what happened is the mining company applied for a permit. They were denied the permit. The Prime Minister overruled that denial and told them to issue the permit, and they issued the permit with all these conditions attached to it, and these residents sued. But here is a concern where NARA is, from a NARA perspective, and the ability that it gives a minister to basically override these regulatory bodies, right? And this bill has cleared the House of Representatives and the Senate, and it's on its way to becoming law. The opposition senators did argue, though, that the bill grants these sweeping powers and without sufficient safeguards, and they had proposed several amendments, that they felt would strengthen accountability, independence, oversight and project management controls, but those were rejected. They did claim that the proposed authority concentrates too much power within the CEO and the responsible minister, who, among other things, will have this power to override regulatory bodies. the former Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs broke rank, actually, with the government and put forward, her very valid and well-presented concerns for the legislation, one of which was, what are the qualifications required for this CEO? I mean, it takes a big pair, to do that, right? To break rank, but I don't know. I mean, after the way the Porsche get mashed up on the road to Republic, Marlene, I'm just going to give you a Nancy Pelosi clap. So, yeah. To wrap up, again, if you're not registered to vote, as I always remind you, if you're not registered to vote, September 30, 2026, that's the deadline to register for the November 30th, 2026 voters list. You can find this podcast on YouTube, Buzzsprout, Spotify, Podcast Index, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Apple, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you want to reason about anything, or if you can't find any of the material I was talking about, you can email me on melanie.atasteofja@gmail.com. Today is Mothering Sunday. I want to quote Proverbs 25 and 28. Strength and honor are her clothing. Her children arise up and call her blessed. If I you that, today is a day you are celebrated by those you love and by those who love you. I love you, Mom, and I'm overwhelmingly honored to be one myself. Until the next time, thank you for supporting this podcast. Please subscribe, like, follow, and share it with your friends and family. And again, I thank you for taking the time to listen. One love. Yes, the word is love.